I pray that I might speak to you today in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. To marry or not to marry? That has been the question that the Anglican Church has been wrestling with for my whole life as it relates to same-gender couples. There have been countless debates. There have been motions, there have been studies, there have been listening circles. This question has been discussed and voted on at every single level of our Anglican Church structure. And we haven't always treated each other well in the process. The conversations have become heated. There has been much anger and hurt inflicted as the Church has tried to discern the answer to this question. And I think the reason for that is because each one of us has a picture in our own mind of what we think God should be like. And that picture of God that we paint, it usually affirms or fits with what we personally think or feel or believe in regards to various topics and issues, such as the one that the Church has wrestled with for so many years, to marry or not to marry same-gender couples. So if we personally think same-gender couples should be allowed to marry, that shapes our picture of what we think God should be like. If we don't personally think that same-gender couples should be allowed to get married, that also shapes our picture of what we think God should be like. But the trouble comes, whether we're aware of it or not, we each use the picture that we have painted of God in our own minds. We use that picture of what we think God is like to judge others. And that includes judging their beliefs and their picture of what they think God is like. I'm pretty sure that this is the sort of thing that's going on in today's gospel reading. John the Baptist comes along and he doesn't measure up. He doesn't fit with what the people think he should be like. He's too reclusive. He goes out into the wilderness all by himself. He's too weird. He's wearing camel hair clothing and eating locusts and wild honey. He's too much of a loner. He's too serious. He's too somber. He should eat and drink more, they say. Then Jesus comes along, and he's too much the opposite. He drinks and eats too much, and with the wrong kind of people to boot. David Luce, in his commentary, he said that perhaps we should call this the Goldilocks Syndrome, never being quite satisfied. John and the God that John represents is just too severe, while Jesus and the God that Jesus represents is just too accepting. We would like our religious leader to be just right, which pretty much means just like us. But here's the thing. If God really were just like us, if God thinks like us, acts like us, behaves like us, agrees with everything about us, if that's the kind of God we're in relationship with, a God who is just like us and agrees with everything, who would save us? Who would challenge us? Who would show us a better way? Who would correct our thoughts and our opinions when they are actually wrong? Who would transform us more and more into the actual image of God and teach us to live more and more with the heart of God? But I think that's what is so appealing about the pictures that we paint for ourselves of who God is and what God is like. Because as David Luce points out, the picture that we paint of what God is like, that doesn't threaten us. Those pictures, they don't expect any change from us. They don't ask us to think differently. They don't ask us to do all that much. And they don't do much more than affirm us. But while affirmation is great, the pictures that we have of God, they don't save. They don't challenge. They don't transform. And so God comes along first in John, and then even more fully in Jesus. God comes along in John, God comes along in Jesus to shake our own hands loose from holding on to our own pictures of God too tightly. God comes along and shows up where we least expect God to be. In a stable, on a cross. God shows up where we least expect God to be in order to shake us up, in order to call what we thought we knew for absolute certainty into question, in order to surprise us by being so different from what we expected, and yet precisely the God that we need. God shows up in unexpected places, eats with people we never would have imagined God eating with, surprises us by loving and accepting people we never would have thought that God would love and accept, blesses people we never would imagine God would ever bless. Not the God we expected, but precisely the God this world and we ourselves need. This past week, Bishop Todd, our diocesan bishop, sent out a letter in regards to equal marriage, in which he said, "Many of us have come to understand that all persons are wholly made in the image of God. We have welcomed LGBTQ2+ persons into our parishes. They have become our deacons and our priests, and within the last year have been able to be married in churches that have been given permission to hold same-sex weddings." Bishop Todd goes on to say, "After thought and prayer, I have decided to remove the requirement that special permission is needed by priests or parishes before a same-sex wedding can be held in a parish. There's no distinction. From my perspective, what this means is that the distinction of marriage between a man and a woman and a marriage between a same-gender couple, that distinction has now been removed. One doesn't need special permission, while the other doesn't. In the eyes of God, marriage is marriage, and love is love." Bishop Todd went on to say that he knows that some will disagree with this decision. And he points out that the Anglican Church is a large tent of diverse theologies, which I think brings us back to the fact that we all have a picture in our mind of what we believe God is like. And that picture that we have in our mind of God is shaped by and strongly influenced by our own personal beliefs or feelings on different things. And while I would never judge anyone's picture or understanding of God, I find myself wondering if today's gospel reading, if it might be inviting us to reflect on whether or not this might be one of those moments where God is showing up in an unexpected place, where God is showing up in a way that some of us would never have expected, in order to shake us up, in order to call what we thought we knew for sure into question, in order to surprise us by being so different from what we expected, and yet precisely the God this world needs. In today's gospel, Jesus, he doesn't simply call our pictures and expectations of God into question. He also paints us an absolutely brand new picture when he says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. The picture that Jesus paints of what God is really like is that God is the one who bears our burdens. God is the one who shows up in your need. God is the one who comes alongside of us, especially when life gets hard, really hard, as it inevitably does. Again, as David Luce points out, nothing demonstrates this commitment to coming to us in our suffering more than the cross. God's willingness to embrace all of our life, even to the point of death, in order to demonstrate God's profound love and commitment for all of God's children. Now, that's not necessarily a picture of God we want either. I think most of us would prefer a God who doesn't simply choose to be with us in our struggles, doesn't simply choose to be with us in the hardships we experience. But I think most of us would prefer a God who would take away all of our problems, a God who would eliminate all the challenges and the struggles that we face in life, rather than a God who equips us and gives us the strength and the courage to face them. It may not be the picture of God we want, especially when we find ourselves right in the midst of hard times, but it really is the God that we need, because growth and transformation so often happens in the midst of the struggles and the hardships and the sorrows that we experience in our lives. And so, may you know that God continues to come to us in unexpected and unlikely places. And may you be open to allowing your hands to be shaken loose from holding on to your own picture of God too tightly in order to experience a God who saves, in order to experience a God who challenges, in order to experience a God who transformed this world and our lives into a new creation. Amen.